ShireFit podcast. This series, Max and Jonny explore how to become the master of your mindset.
Hello. No, we did that perfect timing. Hello and welcome back to the ShireFit podcast. This is episode 7 of our 8-week mindset block.
Hello.
Johnny's asked if we're going to do a deload, but I don't think we will.
We're just going to cruise straight through.
We're going to do the stupid thing and continue to train even though...
What's the next 8-week block, do you know?
Movement.
Is it?
Yes.
Ooh.
You're going to love it.
I'll have to brush up on my anatomy.
Well, it's not going to be anatomy based.
Fair enough.
Right. Today we have quite a varied class actually. So the warm-up is about approaching workouts with different mindsets for training and competing. Mm-hmm. We've touched on that a little bit on and off over the last few podcasts as well. So hopefully we can kind of give a bit more definitive answer today. Mm-hmm. Strength section is our take on that sugar is the root of all evil.
It's not, it's money. Money is
the root of all evil.
I'm joking.
I can't wait to hear Johnny talk about that one. There's going to be a lot to unpack there. And then the workout is about alter egos and trigger switches, which are a couple of tools we can do to help. A couple of tools we can use to help us with our mindset when we're in the gym, in workouts or potentially competing. So to start us off with the warm-up, we have the question from Brad this week. He did not want to remain anonymous.
Right, I didn't know if you just thrown him in there.
Brad asks, how should you approach workouts differently when training versus competing?
Do you want to do that first, your take on that?
Well, yeah, I think this is quite clear actually, and I want to give a really clear and simple and concise answer, which is competing only has one goal, mm-hmm. and it is to maximise your score on that particular day. Training could have a plethora, is that right?
Yeah.
A plethora of goals, depending on what you're trying to work on, what you're trying to improve. For example, if a workout is, for time, the only goal when you're competing is to do it as fast as possible.
Yeah.
But when you're training, you might do the workout, it might say for time, but you might actually intentionally give yourself a slower time by, for example, sticking with double unders or sticking with butterfly chest to bars, when potentially you'd be faster if you just went to normal kipping, because you want to work on it. Yeah. So the goal there is to develop my chest to bars. Yeah. So the goal could change. The goal could be, I want to build my aerobic base. I want to work on developing my chest to bars. I want to work on whatever, grip strength.
Yeah.
I want to work on my mindset. There's a million different goals that you could have in training, but there's only one goal when you compete in, and that is maximise your score.
How do you think that someone could work out on the day what they should focus on when they're training versus competing when they come into the class?
Ooh, on the day, I'd probably say it's probably too late. You could fastball something, but probably takes a bit of planning, I'd say. Like maybe the night before or the week before, if you're training in advance, looking and going, okay, I know that my weaknesses are X, Y, Z. Yeah. And Tuesday's workout, my weakness is wall balls, high volume wall balls. Yeah. Tuesday workout, it's got high volume wall balls. This week it had lots of them.
Right.
And so you might say, right, no matter what, I'm going to go unbroken on the wall balls, even if I have to have a 3-minute rest after a set of wall balls on Tuesday, because I know I need to work on high volume wall balls. I could do it faster if I was competing by doing sets of 10 and dropping it, but I'm training here. So my goal is to go for as many reps unbroken as possible. And so, I think it takes a bit of pre-planning. On the day, maybe ask the coach.
I was going to suggest that.
Yeah. Coaches know individual athletes and weaknesses quite well, so they might be able to give you a little bit more guidance on the day of like, I don't really know how to attack this workout. What do you think I could get best? I could get the most out of it from.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Speaking with the coach was my
You're not
first
on the camera, by the way.
Oh, I forgot that we were recording our videos.
Come closer to me.
My tired eyes. Yeah, so speaking with the coach was one of my first thoughts, because as you said, they'll know the person and also the theme of the workout and the cycle you're in. So the intention behind the cycle as well as the intention of the workout. That's always really important. As we mentioned about competing versus training in the past, as you rightly said, competing is fastest time no matter what happens, biggest lift no matter what happens. Like, and that's when you reach that threshold of technique versus intensity, right? And I think when you're training, you want to stay behind that so that your technique comes to the foreground more. And as you said, it could be, I want to practice my high volume wall balls. You could say, no matter what, I'm going to do my chest to bar pull-ups in sets of this, because I know that beyond that they start to break down. Same with something like toes to bar or handstand push-ups. It could be, I'm going to, with this 10-minute AMRAP, I'm going to focus on trying to move at the same pace continuously, and I'm going to track my laps and make sure that each lap is the same time, or try to, so that I'm practicing that consistency of pacing. And it does depend on what you want out of it. For back squats, heavy back squats, you could say, I want to do each set of 3 at the same weight. And I want to make sure I practice my tempo on the way down, because I have a tendency to drop into the hole too fast and lose my tension, lose my strength. And I've heard that going slower on the way down is better because it allows you to engage more muscles and come up better, which it does.
That's a really good point. Like, one of the main reasons that you want to train is to learn. So like try different things and
experiment.
Like, you might want to just see where your red line is, for example, on like a rowing workout. So you might actually go in and go, I'm going to absolutely smash this first 500 meter row to the detriment of the workout. Like, it does annoy me a little bit sometimes when you hear CrossFit coaches just constantly talking about pacing. Like, you got to pace, you got to pace, you got to pace, you got to pace. Well, there are a time and a place to blow up.
Yeah,
and you get a better training stimulus from that.
If that's
your body's like, if that's the point. And
it's like doing grace. You don't pace grace.
You
just go.
People learn like, oh, that 500 was too fast for me. But if you don't actually ever go too fast, you never figure out what the line is. So the line might be, I can row at 155 per 500 and then get off and go straight to thrusters. If you don't ever try 145 per 500, then you don't learn. And I think one of the main goals of training is learn.
Yeah. Learning and experimenting.
I think another sort of way to think about it, which you triggered me about that, was about inputs. So I think there's a lot of inputs in training. How you slept, how you've ate, who you're with, like how your muscles are feeling, your joints are feeling a bit. And it's about listening to those and making informed decisions for the day based on you when you're training. I always feel like competing is the complete opposite. It's about ignore external, there's no input. That we ignore how your knees are feeling, like to an extent. Imagine we're competing at a high level and it's life or death or money.
Well, you have knee sleeves, belts,
whatever. So, when you're competing, it's about, I don't care how I've slept, I don't care how I feel, I don't care if my joints are sore, I don't care. Like, the goal is to win. The goal is to get this workout done as fast as possible.
Yeah, and we just mentioned that about assistant stuff, and just in case it wasn't heard on another podcast, I think that's another thing too, in that for me, training, I don't wear any assistance stuff at all, like no lifters, no belts, no sleeves, because I'm not competing. I'm not trying to get a 1 rep max. I'm not putting my body on the line for a result as I would do if I was competing. I'm instead training a stimulus. My squats are slower. I don't bounce out of the hole. I don't push that technique barrier unless I'm trying to test my 1 rep max. And again, that's very rare, because most of the time I'm training for a stimulus.
Yeah, and to go back to the answer, the reason for that is because you're not trying to maximise your score on that day.
No.
You're about, I want the muscles to feel strong and my joints to be healthy, and I want, all those things.
Yeah, stimulus.
Cool. Wicked. On to the next part of the podcast, which is our take on a popular fitness concept, which is that this week, sugar is the root of all evil.
Don't worry, we don't need to spend too long here, because I can recommend a great podcast that goes into more depth than we can.
Okay, cool.
Purely because they have all of the notes written down, all of the science about it, and you texted me this at 8 o'clock this morning, so I had a little time to prepare. But what I'd say is that in every generation or layers of generation, we have the scapegoat. And when we were younger and our parents were younger, it was fats. Fats was the scapegoat. Yeah. Everything was low fat.
Fats was bad.
Low fat diet, because everything was bad. You'll be fat. Exactly. And now it's sugar. Government policy is tax on sugar. Let's tax sugar. It needs to be more expensive, and then we'll consume less of it. And we've not actually looked at the trends of, everybody's blaming higher BMIs on sugar. Everybody's blaming all-cause mortality, diabetes, and all these things on sugar. But if you look at the graphs of average weight gain, if you look at the graphs of sugar intake, these things have been coming down actually for last 10, 20, maybe even 30 years. I can't remember the graphs exactly, but there's not that correlation that people say there is. And if we look at, because food processing has a link here where there's a big thing about don't eat processed food, don't eat sugar. You mentioned inflammation. I know we're going to go into it, and there's a lot of all of that language thrown around. And really that language concludes the natural fallacy that everything natural must be therefore better for you. And of course, there are plenty of natural things that we shouldn't consume at all. And if we look at the Industrial Revolution, which started to bring in more food processing so food would last longer because of the scarcity of food in that environment and the war and all the rest of it, there again wasn't trends in people's negative health outcomes. That for me has been much later than the addition of processed food. Sugar is your body's main source of fuel and your brain's main source of fuel. And your body really doesn't recognize where it gets that from. It's just the speed in which it's broken down. So sugar itself table sugar is glucose, which is one of the three quote unquote simple sugars, which just means monosaccharide, fructose, glucose, and that other one is, sucrose. Table sugar is sucrose, isn't it? I'm coming across really bad now.
Well, there's glucose, dextrose, fructose.
Well, dextrose isn't isn't a mono. No. So there's my lack of prep there and reading my notes. But anyway, it all gets broken down into the same thing, which is glucose into the blood.
Yeah.
So the speed of which it's digested doesn't really matter unless you have diabetes. And this is the thing, is that people are starting to get obsessed with blood sugar spikes. And if you're a person without diabetes and your insulin works correctly, a blood sugar spike post-meal is a natural response to a meal, and your body will have these spikes of blood. Insulin will get produced, it will then store that sugar, the spike will come down, you'll eat the next meal, that will happen, it will peak, it will come down, it will peak, it will come down. The issue is when there's an excess there, and that's when I'm saying that the devil is in the dose.
Yeah.
And that's person dependent.
Yeah, that's such a good line.
And it's therefore people are blaming sugar and inflammation. And as I said, inflammation is a natural response in the cell as well. Cells get damaged, they get inflamed. When you get ill, cells get inflamed. When you train, cells get inflamed. But your body has processes to recover, and then it comes back to baseline. I think the issue is not the food environment per se. The food environment is higher sugar, higher calorie than it ever has been, but the devil is in the dose, and the devil, I think, is in the lifestyle. We are putting so much onus on the food rather than saying we have 24-hour technology focused lifestyles. Everybody's working on their laptops, especially now post-pandemic, more than ever, because of remote working and the lack of then commuting to and from an office, or even having outside-based jobs compared to laptop-based jobs from a flexibility of lifestyle. We're moving less than ever in terms of exercise, regular life. We're then eating this modern food environment. We're not sleeping as well. We're constantly on laptops and phones and technology. We're constantly wired on, constantly emailing, constantly working, really shitty boundaries with work-life balance. And so then, there's low family time, low relationship time, low sun exposure, low water intake,
poor quality relationships,
poor quality of everything,
attached to everything else.
And I think that in itself, that's the storm, and we want a scapegoat, because for the government it's easy to go, let's just blame sugar and tax it, rather than let's have a look at all of this and all of the social determinants of health and try and improve everything on a baseline.
Passion.
But in more detail of that, check out the maintenance phase podcast on sugar, because they go really into government policies. It's a really good episode.
So I have my own agenda behind some of these concepts you probably spotted. As this sparked from a conversation I had with my wife, who has been listening to a lot of the TED podcast, not TED, sorry, what's it called, Zoe podcast. Tim Spector. And I think we just need to be careful about these big swings from one side to the other. And then, actually, the blood sugar spike and then release of insulin and then the drop in that is actually a pretty normal function as long as it's functioning properly. And like I say, as long as it's not overdosed, overused, and something like exercise, for example, is a key part of that. Choices is a key part of that. Like, it's not, sugar is not the evil thing here. The dose is the evil.
That's it, because
combined with everything else that we're facing at the moment. Like, when would you, as a nutrition expert, say that is a good time for people? Like, when should sugar be consumed? You know, for example.
Well, that's the thing. Like, we all say, like, we just call it sugar, and it's dependent on the form that comes in, as I mentioned. So something that is more, let's say, bread, for example. There's differences in bread, like white bread versus whole grain. And that's usually a difference in the flour as well as the fiber content there. So the fiber content slows down the digestion of the food, and then it slows down the blood, the sugar entering the blood for that reason. Whereas if you eat a jelly baby, straight in, it's simple, it's easily broken down, and therefore the speed is higher.
I love that, like, for the video.
For the video, everything's video. I've been using the spikes as well. Get more on video, but you can tell there then that the speed of digestion is what causes the spike, right? The level of the height of the spike or the length of the spike. And as I mentioned, for somebody who's got a healthy working body with regards to isn't diabetic and has a good insulin response, we'll just process that and get on by. For people who are more active, they'll need more carbohydrates than people who are less active. And particularly for people who are training more regularly or at higher intensities, the speed of the digestion there does matter more than for the everyday person.
Yeah, right? So you're saying, like, because I'm active, my blood sugar level will be dropping. Yeah. And so eventually I'm going to need to bring it back up again.
And your body's going to use stored glucose, glucose in the body stored as glycogen. It's going to break that down, bring glucose into the blood as needed, but you only have so much glycogen stores, and thereby if you're depleting them every day, which isn't impossible depending on the volume of training, particularly for an endurance athlete, they're going to need to take more in for that to remain level. And for regular people, it's unlikely you're going to be depleting your glycogen stores, but it's why there's benefit to eating before training, eating after training, and having that benefit then to know that you are taking in enough to perform well and get a good adaptation from training. But what my point is that even if you had some sweets every now and then, or some white carbohydrates like white bread or white pasta, your body, as long as it's healthy, is going to process that. When you pair those things with protein, with fats, with fiber, slows down the digestion of it. And that's where food pairing becomes important for satiety, for staying full. And you don't need to worry about your blood sugar spikes if you haven't got an issue. And that's what I don't like about the Zoe protocol per se. I think some of the research they've done on gut health and stuff is really ahead of its time. We can't make definitive conclusions from it yet. And I think to do so is jumping the gun. I think they've got certain conclusions and theories from certain research that they're then acting on too quickly, in my opinion, and the opinion of other evidence-based professionals. And I think hyper-analyzing your blood sugar spikes, unless you have reason to do so, I think that can just make people too obsessed in a not helpful way. And I think I see a lot of that in wellness culture, as I mentioned, with the natural fallacy of like, oh, it all needs to be 100% natural, it needs to be clean, it needs to be healthy, it needs to be perfect, because then you're really hyper analyzing on that, which could have a detriment to social health, financial health, even overall health and well-being. Like you might have that restrictive of a food intake that actually you start to get digestive issues, which has been seen. And unfortunately, then you think, my digestive issues because I'm not doing well enough. I need to do it more.
You turn into a nasty person and then fall out with your loved one. Like, that's much more important.
This isn't a personal story.
No. Okay. What's the mechanism? Why is sugar being called the root of all evil? And what's the excess? Like, if you've got excessive consumption on a regular basis, what's the mechanism of injury? Basically, what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think that's why people blame it so much, right? It's because we are seeing or have seen an increase in lifestyle-related diseases, like diabetes and heart disease and things like that in the population. People are then turning to forms of processed food and fast foods that are high in sugar and saying that it's because of our consumption of these foods. And it's one of those where there's an association with that but that doesn't always mean that that's definitively the cause, because it's that combination of lifestyle. But what happens if you overconsume these foods versus your activity is effectively there's too much sugar in the blood, right? So when you eat carbohydrates, because everybody blames insulin, right? They're like, it stores fat, blah, blah, blah. Insulin stores everything. You produce insulin so that you can turn your protein into storage for amino acids, hair growth, muscle growth, all those things. You produce insulin, it stores carbohydrates, it's glycogen, and it stores fat in the body as well, which you need. You need it to live. So insulin isn't the bad guy. The thing is that if you overconsume carbs relative to your activity levels, your body can only store so much glycogen in the muscles and in the liver. And then after that, there's going to still be a certain amount in the blood. If there's still sugar in the blood that isn't being used at that moment in activity, what have you,
that's not good.
The body produces more insulin because it's like, we need to do something with this. We need to get rid of it, or we need to store it as something. An excess of sugar might be stored as fat, although some research suggests that the amount of energy you need for that process is quite high. So you would need to be excessively eating carbohydrates at quite high levels for quite long periods of time for that conversion of glucose to fat to happen, because it's a very expensive process for the body to go through. But if your body keeps pumping out insulin, the effect of insulin lessens. So the amount of it stores each time lessens, which means that then there still remains an excess of sugar in the blood. And that over time then causes what's known as insulin resistance, because insulin doesn't have as much of an effect anymore. And that in terms is when you get blood sugar issues, which is diabetes type 2.
And then just quickly for the educational members, is what's the other side of that mechanism? So when your blood sugar drops
too low,
what happens?
Well, that's when, if your body can't mobilize glycogen from the body and bring it into the blood to use as activity, that's when your blood sugar drops too low. And that's when you get lightheaded, low energy. That's when people faint and get really hungry. For example, people might lose weight as a result. That's like the opposite side of the spectrum, where again,
there's
things
like
aren't working
nasties
properly.
on either side, right? Too much sugar, overconsumption of sugar, nasties.
Because if you
sugar,
underconsume it, your body's going to have to utilize it from the body, and your body's eventually going to run out.
Yeah, wicked. Like I say, I think that that answer could have gone on for a lot longer, and there's a lot to unpack there. But yeah, just a hot take on something.
I think again, it's
quite topical at the moment.
I think it's just let's look at our overall lifestyles rather than blaming one thing, and that's what's really difficult with government policies. Because then you need to address adequate healthcare for everybody. You need to address socioeconomic issues, activity levels, education from a neutral manner, relationship with food. Because what we didn't even mention was a lot of people bring up like rat studies to say that sugar's addictive. Look at them over consuming sugar. Sugar releases the same chemical in the brain as drugs. It's like, well, so does hugging a dog, right? That doesn't mean I'm addicted to hugging my dog. I mean, I am. If you ask Natalie, she'd say I definitely am. But when in the rat studies, sugar is only consumed in excess when it is provided intermittently. So then you draw the conclusion that actually what they're doing is that they're consuming sugar because they want to store it in their body, because they're not sure where they'll get it again. They're used to it being taken away from them.
Yeah.
And there's that modern relationship with food piece where you think if you have food that you deem unhealthy or bad for you or given in isolated doses, you are going to latch onto that and eat it in excess because you're not sure when you're next going to get it and your body needs it to live. It's why there's a big kick against over dieting in terms of excessive reduction of calorie intake, is that your body's like, shit, I need energy, I need calories. That's when people say they crave sugar. It's like, well, you're probably craving energy.
Yeah.
You probably either slept badly or you're under eating or both. Absolute shitstorm. Because then your body wants the quickest source of energy it can get and for the biggest bang for its buck. And also then if you think it's bad and then restrict it again, next time you have it, it's going to be like, give me all that. And that's the whole like cheat day mindset.
Back and forth. Yeah. Slight segue. Jack's currently barbecuing and it smells delicious.
Oh yeah,
and my
it's
blood
making me
sugar's a little
hungry.
bit low. So
Oh yeah, we both just trained and it's 12 o'clock. So.
Right, onto the workout then, guys, which is a couple of tools that we can use to help us perform better in training, in the gym or potentially in a competition setting. And tools we've got today to look at are alter egos and trigger switches. And this is something that you see across all sports. I'm going to give a boxing example. Johnny's going to give a cricket example, and then we're going to give a CrossFit example for it as well. So the alter ego is like creating a different person within yourself, not necessarily a Jekyll and Hyde, but an almost different version of yourself. You could call it the best version of yourself that you need in certain situations. An example being is Tyson Fury, the boxer. He has Tyson Fury, who is just a normal man who eats pies and chips, fish fingers and beans, if you listen to his podcasts. He's a normal guy, does the washing up, has a family, spends time with them, whatever. And Tyson Fury feels what normal men feel, i.e. he's worried about fighting, new up-and-coming fighters who are got good records, and he's scared about getting into the ring in front of thousands of people and failing potentially and all those things. And he has those natural, normal thoughts. And then he has the opposite, not the opposite, but his other side, his alter ego, which is the Gypsy King. And the Gypsy King doesn't feel fear, knows he's the best in the world, is ready to step in front of the ring and perform in front of everybody, and doesn't feel doubt. And he's created those two different parts of himself. And then the trigger switch is when you switch between those two. And for Tyson, if you've listened to his interviews, his switch is the press conference. So when he walks into the press conference, he becomes the Gypsy King. And then he holds the Gypsy King right up until the fight and after the fight night. And then after he's finished the fight, he takes himself back, and he goes home and he does the washing up and he becomes Tyson Fury again. Now, that's quite a far-fetched example, but it's easy to talk through in the boxing or fight sports because they often name their alter egos. You get the Notorious, you get Iron Mike Tyson, you get all these people, and their switches are quite obvious for everybody. But my question to you guys, the listeners today, is can you create your own alter ego for yourself in situations that you need to, potentially block out some fears, work on being the best version of yourself, the most confident, the most outgoing version of yourself? Jonny, you've got a cricket example, seeing as we've got the Ashes on the moment.
Yeah, so Ben Stokes is the England captain at the minute, and he's what they call an all-rounder, meaning that he bats and bowls. And it's not that he is the best person in the team. He's not the best batter, not the best bowler. And he doesn't have the best record in terms of big scores. 50s and 100s is the stats that you'd see in batsmen, as well as total runs, or even most wickets. But what Ben does better than any other player is step up to the big occasion. And it's really interesting how the more pressure that's on him, the better he seems to play. And I think he really hypes up to that in terms of being somebody who, if a big occasion is there and a big performance is needed, he's going to step up, and he's like, I'm going to be the guy to take that role. I'm not going to leave it to somebody else. I'm going to be that guy. And he did it 4 years ago at Leeds, at Headingley Cricket Ground, when it wasn't even the last day of the match, and we needed over 200 runs to beat the Australians. We had 7 wickets, which means 7 other batsmen in hand, but everybody else got out rather than Ben, and Ben was left with our number 11, who is your worst batter and a bowler usually, and he manipulated the play so that he would only hit boundaries, so he'd only hit it over the rope, meaning the other person wouldn't have to face bowling, even though the Aussies would put everybody back on the boundary to try and stop it, so he'd go over their heads. He'd hit it for 6, even though there's a risk of getting out.
Yeah.
And he would rotate the strike only at the end of the over to protect the other person. And he did that as much as he could. The other person did have to face some deliveries, and there was quite a lot of that in terms of the Australians didn't take their chance, loads of it. But we won the game, basically, against all odds. And he did something very similar just last week, where we needed a shed ton to win, and it was only him and a few of the bowlers actually by this point, and he went from 50 to 155 in quite quick time, but unfortunately got out, and we ended up losing the game just the other week. But he also had a big performance when we won our first one-day international World Cup, was the guy that saw us over the line, and he batted in the super over and everything. So he just seems to pull himself into the big occasion, and I think that for him is his alter ego of, I'm not just Ben the cricketer now, I need to be the person to get us over the line here.
Yeah, and so his trigger switch is quite an interesting one, and that's when
it's like the most pressure there is. Yeah, like everybody else is crumbling, and he's
yeah.
like, I need to be the rock here. Yeah.
And so trying to give an example then of a CrossFitter who uses this type of technique would be someone like Brent Fikowski, who obviously competes at the highest level, and he's got his kind of alter ego, which is called the Professor.
Yeah, and they gave that to him, because he was he a doctor, student of medicine? Was he accountant?
Yeah.
Who am I thinking of then?
That's part of Elner. It was a chiropractor.
Yeah, okay, medical school. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Professor, he has the, Brent has this, alter ego, the Professor, and he basically knows when he's in competition and it's a chipper, that workout is his, and that's when he brings his best version of himself, because it's about strategy, it's about pacing, it's about timing, tempo, all those things. The details.
I think he does that with every workout.
Yeah.
He'll have a plan for every workout, and it's funny how we mentioned about training versus competing. Because actually, when you then compete, you need to bring that knowledge of training to your competitive floor. Like, how do I pace this workout to get the best score?
Yeah.
How do I gauge these lifts to get
He's probably not the best athlete out there, but he delivers perfectly. He executes perfectly. So, can we use that in the gym? In that you don't necessarily have to have a crazy name for yourself. It doesn't have to be the Professor or whatever. But you might just be able to create a different person for yourself in that. When you can say to yourself, like, when I'm in the gym, I'm not scared to try. I'm going to try everything. When I'm in the gym, I'm the person that works the hardest in the last 2 minutes. When I'm in the gym, I'm the person that always gives everything on the runs. Whatever it is, creating that person allows you to deliver your best when you need to, and giving yourself that trigger switch as well. An example for me is when I first started coaching, and I had a chat with Jack Fletney. He was like my mentor at the time, and he gave me some really good advice where he said that, because I was a little bit nervous when I first started coaching, and the way I compensated for that was being very direct and very military and very authoritarian. But what it stopped me from doing was being like personable and nice and, connecting with people. So,
well, you were putting on a front, weren't you?
Exactly.
Because you were nervous. So you were like over-egging your confidence. You were almost being worthy of like playing a part.
Exactly, yeah. And so Jack was like, look, you need to be confident. Like, when you step onto that gym floor, he was like, recognize that you are the best person on that day in that gym to teach those people. It was quite an interesting thing to think about, because he said, like, there's some millions of talented coaches in the world, but if you just flew them in and just got them to start the class, they wouldn't be in the best place to coach those people, because they don't know them, they don't know the gym, they don't know the programming, they don't know the history.
Yep.
You know all of that, so you are the best person. And he says, every time you walk onto that gym floor to take a class, I want you to say that, like, in your own head, go, I'm the best person right now at this time to take this class. And not that I really actually do that now, but I do feel myself change into Max the coach as I step forward to take a class. And I feel like maybe something that the members could take away is like, what are you like? What do you want to be like in the CrossFit class? And can you create that person for yourself? And by the way, it's completely normal to have fears and doubts and worries. And that, Tyson Fury explained that quite eloquently on his podcast. Like, I'm a normal man. Of course I fear fighting Deontay Wilder. He's 6'4" and 110 kilos and knocks people out for fun.
Yeah.
But when I'm in the ring, I'm Gypsy King.
Yeah.
Gypsy King's not scared.
Yeah, it's good that, because you've got a massive life outside the gym, and you come to the gym for an hour of the day, right? And only 3 or 4 times a week, or 5 or whatever, or 2, whatever you can manage. And it's good to bring yourself to the gym and then try to let go of everything else that's happened in your life up to that point as much as possible. People obviously have different lifestyles and different things to deal with at any one day, which makes that harder. It does. I'm not saying it doesn't, and not diminishing anyone's experience. It's just thinking about that attitude in training, as you mentioned there, Max, to say, like we mentioned with the episode about being in a CrossFit gym makes you a better person. It's that idea of a CrossFit gym is about new skills, hard things, heavy weights, and having fun with your mates. Didn't mean for that to rhyme, but it just did.
That was amazing.
Um,
Wish we had a soundbite of that.
But it's true in that if you can then bring that attitude to the gym of, even if it's we mentioned about 2 workout movements on the board might get you, oh man, they suck, like I hate thrusters and burpees. That open workout where it was row and thrusters, like, ugh. But if you can then say to yourself, if you can spin that, reframe that to a more, it's thought reframing at the end of the day, reframe it to a more helpful thing that you might say to a mate and say, you've been working on these recently. This is a great opportunity for you to practice your pace on the rower. This is a great opportunity for you to practice your pacing on the thrusters. Let's look at how we can break that down into sets so that I can be my best self in today's training session, rather than think, this is going to be shit, I'm going to suck at this, going at it too hard. And then it's like confirmation bias of like, I knew I was going to be shit at that, rather than approaching it with a slightly different mindset.
Yeah. So I look forward to hearing about some of your alter egos.
Yeah, and your names. Get your names.
We've got Big Bad Brad.
Because you can then wear those names on the Royal Rumble, can't you?
Yeah.
You can come in with
We've
that.
got Slick Rick, Bobby D.
What was Jack Turner that you were talking about when he was?
Jack Turner was 130 kid.
130 kid.
The 130 kid. Because after semi-finals, when he snatched 130 and everybody saw it,
such a great lift.
people were just walking around, just like, "Are you that guy? 130? The guy who snatched 130?"
I love that. Yeah, but you would love that, wouldn't you? Like, that's a massive moment.
It was a huge moment.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, guys, and take something away from it. Look forward to asking you what your alter ego is going to be in the gym and what your trigger switches are going to be. See you soon.
Thank you for listening to the ShireFit podcast with Max and Jonny. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week for another episode.